The creature they gave me wouldn't stop shaking. Command called her a diplomatic asset, but everyone in the barracks knew what she really was, a trophy from the Velcari surrender. Sergeant Marcus Cole stood in the processing bay, watching the small alien female huddle in the corner of her transport crate, her silver-blue skin catching the harsh fluorescent light. Her large dark eyes, too large for her delicate face, tracked every movement in the room with the wariness of prey. "She's yours now, Sergeant," Captain Torres said, tapping the transfer pad. "High Command wants her integrated." Something about cultural exchange protocols. Marcus didn't respond. He'd spent 3 years fighting the Velcari on Proxima 4th. He'd watched friends die in their crystalline minefields. And now they wanted him to babysit one? "She has a name," Torres added, almost as an afterthought. "Syl'veth. Apparently she was some kind of scholar before the war. I didn't ask." Torres sighed. "Look, Cole, I know your history. But orders are orders. She's been assigned to you specifically because of your record. You keep people alive. Command figures you can keep her alive too." After Torres left, Marcus approached the crate slowly. The Velcari, Syl'veth, pressed herself further into the corner, her four-fingered hands clutching her knees. She was small, barely reaching his chest if she stood, and painfully thin. The traditional robes she wore hung loose on her frame. "I'm not going to hurt you," Marcus said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. How many times had he said the opposite to her kind? She didn't respond. He wasn't even sure she understood standard. He opened the crate door and stepped back, giving her space. "Come on, I'll show you where you're staying." For a long moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she uncurled herself and stood on trembling legs. When she walked, Marcus noticed she kept her head bowed, her eyes fixed on the floor. Submission posture. He'd seen it in prisoners of war. He hated it. The quarters they'd assigned were small. A converted storage room with 2 bunks, a small table, and a private bathroom. Luxury by military standards. Marcus dropped his pack on the lower bunk and gestured to the upper one. "That's yours." Syl'veth stood by the door, still not looking at him. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers intertwined in a gesture he didn't recognize. "Can you understand me?" he asked. A slight nod. "Can you speak standard?" Another nod, smaller this time. "Then talk." Silence stretched between them. Marcus was about to give up when her voice came, barely above a whisper. "I understand my position." Her accent was thick, but her grammar was precise. Marcus crossed his arms. "And what position is that?" "I am yours. A symbol of victory. You may do with me as your customs dictate." The words were delivered with such resignation that Marcus felt something twist in his gut. He'd seen a lot of ugly things in war, but this quiet acceptance might be the worst. "I'm not going to do anything to you," he said roughly. "Just stay out of my way and don't cause problems. That's all I want." She bowed her head lower. Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "Mess hall's down the corridor if you're hungry. 3 meals a day, 600, 1200, and 1800. He left before she could respond, telling himself it was because he had reports to file, not because he couldn't stand to look at her anymore. 3 days passed. Syl'veth hadn't eaten. Marcus noticed when he came back from his evening shift and found the meal packets exactly where he'd left them, on her bunk, untouched. The first day he'd assumed she wasn't hungry. The second day he'd figured she didn't like human food. By the third day the medic's words from her intake exam echoed in his head. She's already underweight. Velcari can go about 5 days without food before organ damage starts. He found her sitting in the corner of the room. She never used the bunk, with her knees drawn up to her chest. The same position she'd been in when they'd given her to him. "You need to eat," he said. She didn't respond. "Look, I don't know if it's a hunger strike or some kind of protest, but it is neither." Her voice was quiet, emotionless. "I simply cannot." Marcus frowned. "Cannot or won't?" For the first time since her arrival, Syl'veth looked up at him. Her dark eyes held something he hadn't expected. Shame. "Among my people, to eat alone is bland. It is for the disgraced, the outcast. Food is shared. Meals are communion." She looked away again. "I know I am disgraced. I know I am outcast. But my body remembers what my mind accepts. I cannot make myself eat." Marcus stood there, processing this. It was such a simple thing, eating together. Something humans did without thinking. "Why didn't you say something?" It was not my place to make demands of my keeper. That word again. Keeper. Trophy. Asset. He was getting sick of all of them. Without a word, Marcus grabbed 2 meal packets and sat down on the floor across from her. She watched him with wide eyes as he tore open the packaging, the familiar smell of reconstituted protein and vegetables filling the small space. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Eating dinner." He took a bite, chewing mechanically. "You going to join me or what?" Syl'veth stared at him like he'd just performed some incomprehensible act of magic. Her hands shook as she reached for the second packet. "I do not understand," she whispered. "What's to understand? You need to eat. You can't eat alone. So eat together. Simple." "But you're a person who's going to starve to death in my quarters if you don't eat something," Marcus interrupted. "I'm not explaining that to command, and I'm not living with the guilt. So shut up and eat." She opened the packet slowly, almost reverently. When she took her first bite, her eyes closed, and something that might have been relief washed over her features. They ate in silence, sitting on the cold floor of a military storage room, but for the first time since she'd arrived, Syl'veth's hands weren't shaking. When they finished, she looked at him with those 2 large eyes. "Among my people," she said softly, "to share a meal is to acknowledge another as worthy. Equal. You have given me a great gift, Sergeant Cole." Marcus gathered up the empty packets, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's just dinner. Don't make it into something it's not." But as he lay in his bunk that night, listening to the soft sound of her breathing from above, he wondered if maybe it was something after all. First patrol assignment came 2 weeks later. "You want me to take her into a potential combat zone?" Marcus stared at Captain Torres like she'd lost her mind. "It's reconnaissance only. Low risk." Torres slid the mission brief across her desk. "And High Command wants assessment reports on Velcari integration. You can't assess integration if she never leaves your quarters." Marcus had to admit she had a point. In the 2 weeks since the dinner incident, Syl'veth had begun to change. Small things. She used her bunk now. She initiated conversation occasionally. She no longer flinched when he entered the room. But she still hadn't stepped outside. "She's a civilian," he tried. "A scholar. She's never seen combat. Neither had most of your squad before Proxima 4th. That shut him up. Torres had served with him there. She knew exactly which wounds that comment would reopen. Syl'veth took the news with her usual quiet acceptance, but Marcus noticed something new in her eyes: curiosity. "I have never seen your world outside these walls," she admitted as they geared up. "Only the inside of transport ships and holding facilities." Marcus handed her a lightweight tactical vest, adjusting the straps to fit her smaller frame. "It's not pretty. Just farmland and some mining colonies. Nothing special. To you, perhaps. To me, everything is strange." She tilted her head, that gesture he'd come to recognize as consideration. "Your sun is yellow. Ours was white-blue. I wonder how your plants tolerate such warm light." He almost smiled. Almost. The patrol route took them through the agricultural sector, fields of modified grain stretching toward the horizon under a dusty orange sky. Marcus kept Syl'veth close, one eye on the terrain and one on her reaction. She walked carefully, her bare feet finding purchase on the unfamiliar soil. "You should wear boots," he said. "Standard issue. Velcari feel the ground to navigate. It is how we sense vibration danger." She flexed her toes in the dirt. "Your boots would blind me." Specialist Reeves' walking point shot a look back at them. "Sarge, we've got movement northwest. Probably just farmers, but stay sharp." Marcus's hand went to his rifle automatically, and he noticed Syl'veth tense beside him. "I will not run," she said quietly. "I know you are concerned I will flee. That's not what I'm concerned about." She blinked at him. "Then what?" Marcus didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. The movement turned out to be farmers, a group of colonists who regarded Syl'veth with open hostility, but said nothing under Marcus's steady gaze. They continued the patrol without incident, but the tension had revealed something. "Your people do not want me here," Syl'veth observed as they headed back to base. "Can you blame them? We were at war for 3 years. No, I cannot blame them." She was quiet for a moment. "I only wonder why you are different." Marcus stopped walking. Syl'veth took another few steps before realizing he wasn't beside her anymore. "I'm not different," he said. "I killed plenty of your people on Proxima 4th. I'm probably responsible for more Velcari deaths than anyone else in this sector." He expected fear, accusation, hatred. Instead, she simply nodded. I know. I read your commendation records. You are what my people would call a Vel'kari, a death bringer. She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. And yet you sat on the floor and ate cold protein paste so that I would not starve. I don't pretend to understand humans, Sergeant Cole. But I am beginning to think understanding may be possible. That night they ate together again, this time at the small table instead of the floor. Marcus had requisitioned some actual food from the kitchen, nothing special, just bread and some kind of stew, but Syl'veth acted like he'd presented her with a feast. This is remarkable, she said, examining a piece of bread. You grow plants to make this? Wheat, yeah. Marcus watched her turn the bread over in her fingers. What do Velcari eat? Cultivated proteins mostly. And crystals. You eat crystals? Our homeworld was mineral-rich. A shadow passed over her face. Marcus knew, of course. The Velcari homeworld had been rendered uninhabitable in the final year of the war. A human strike. Billions dead. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling inadequate. Syl'veth set down the bread. You did not give the order. I was part of the war machine that did, and I was part of the civilization that invaded your colonies and killed your people. She met his eyes. We are both survivors of something terrible. Perhaps that is enough for now. They finished the meal in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Something had shifted between them, some wall had developed a crack. When Syl'veth climbed into her bunk that night, she paused. Sergeant Cole, yeah? Thank you for taking me outside today. I'd forgotten what stars looked like from the ground. Marcus turned off the light. Call me Marcus. He couldn't see her face in the dark, but he heard the small intake of breath that meant he'd surprised her. Marcus, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Syl'veth. The attack came without warning. Marcus woke to the sound of alarms and the acrid smell of smoke. His training kicked in before his conscious mind caught up. He was on his feet, rifle in hand, eyes scanning for threats. The base was shaking. Explosions somewhere in the distance. Syl'veth, move. She was already dropping from her bunk, her movements quick and precise. 4 weeks of living with a soldier had taught her something about emergency response. What is happening? She asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Rebel attack. The colonists who don't want the peace. Marcus grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Stay behind me. The corridor was filled with smoke and running soldiers. Through the haze, Marcus could see flashes of weapons fire, hear the screams of the wounded. This wasn't a small raid. This was a full assault. Cole. Specialist Reeves appeared through the smoke, blood running down his face. They've taken the command center. Captain Torres is trapped. How many? At least 40. They've got military hardware. Someone's been supplying them. Marcus's mind raced. Torres had 30 soldiers under her command, but if the rebels had the command center, they controlled the base's defenses. They needed to neutralize that threat, but... He looked at Syl'veth. Her dark eyes were wide, but she wasn't panicking. She was watching him, waiting for his decision. Can you fight? He asked. No. But I will not hide while others die. She touched his arm lightly. I can sense vibrations through the ground. I may be able to track their movements, warn you of ambushes. It was something. Stay close. You sense anything wrong, you tell me immediately. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. They moved through the base, Reeves taking point, Marcus covering Syl'veth. 3 times she warned them of enemy positions, rebels waiting around corners, tripwires they would have missed. Each time, her information was perfect. How does she know? Reeves whispered after the 3rd warning. He's Velcari. They feel vibrations differently than we do. Reeves looked at Syl'veth with new eyes. Good. Keep doing that. They reached the command center to find it fortified, 10 rebels inside with Torres and several other officers as hostages. Marcus assessed the situation from behind cover, his tactical mind working the problem. We can't breach without getting the hostages killed, Reeves said. They've got clear sightlines on all entrances. There's another way. Syl'veth spoke quietly. The ventilation system. I am small enough to fit, and I can sense where each person is standing. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. You're not trained for this, no. But I can create a distraction that is unexpected. They will not anticipate a Velcari in the vents. It will give you seconds perhaps, but seconds may be enough. She was right. Marcus knew she was right, but the thought of sending her into danger made something in his chest constrict. If anything goes wrong, then you will have to save me. She almost smiled. You are very good at keeping people alive, Marcus. I have read your records, remember? Before he could argue further, she was moving toward the ventilation access, her small body slipping into the narrow space with an ease that made him realize she'd thought about escape routes before. The longest 30 seconds of Marcus's life followed. He counted them, rifle trained on the command center door, every muscle tense. Then he heard her voice, clear and strange, singing something in Velcari that made the rebels inside freeze with shock. Marcus moved. The breach was fast and brutal. The rebels, confused by the alien singing from above them, reacted half a second too slow. That half second was enough. Marcus put down 3 before they could turn their weapons. Reeves and the other soldiers flooding in behind him handled the rest. When it was over, Marcus found Syl'veth curled in the ventilation shaft above the command center, her whole body shaking. He reached up, and she came to him, sliding out of the narrow space and into his arms before she seemed to realize what she was doing. You're okay, he said, holding her awkwardly. You're okay. I was very frightened, she admitted, her voice muffled against his tactical vest. Yeah, me too. She pulled back to look at him, those 2 large eyes searching his face. You were frightened. For yourself. For you. Something passed between them in that moment, recognition of something that had changed without either of them noticing. Marcus released her quickly, stepping back, suddenly aware that half the base was watching them. Good work, Torres said, approaching with a slight limp. Both of you. Syl'veth bowed her head in that submission gesture Marcus had come to hate, but Torres shook her head. None of that, you helped save this base. She offered a human handshake which Syl'veth accepted with evident surprise. I'll make sure Command knows. Later, in their quarters, Marcus checked Syl'veth for injuries she'd sworn she didn't have. He found scrapes on her arms from the ventilation ducts, small cuts on her feet from running through debris. Nothing serious, but the sight of her silver-blue blood made his stomach turn. You should have stayed hidden, he said, applying antiseptic more gently than he'd ever done for himself. You would have failed the breach without my distraction. Torres and the others would have died. You could have died. Syl'veth was quiet for a moment. Among my people there is a concept, Syl'veth. It means one whose life is bound with another. When one faces danger, both face it. When one falls, both mourn. She looked at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. I did not understand until today why I felt compelled to help. I think perhaps I have become Syl'veth without meaning to. Marcus didn't know what to say. He finished bandaging her feet in silence. I'm sorry, she said softly, if this makes you uncomfortable. I know you did not ask for a bond. I know I was given to you as a symbol of defeat. I do not expect. Stop. Marcus sat back on his heels, looking up at her. Stop apologizing for existing. Stop apologizing for having feelings. I'm tired of it. Her eyes widened. I do not understand. Neither do I. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own inability to articulate what was happening inside him. I just know that when you went into that vent, I couldn't breathe until you came back out. And that's not how you feel about a trophy or an asset. Syl'veth was very still. How do you feel about me then? Marcus didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, and he wasn't ready to say it out loud. I don't know, he admitted. But I want to figure it out. For the first time since he'd known her, Syl'veth smiled. A small, uncertain thing, but real. That, she said softly, is more than I ever hoped for. 6 months later, the diplomatic delegation arrived. Velcari officials, representatives of the newly formed coalition government, came to finalize the peace treaty, and among other things to reclaim their citizens who had been distributed as cultural assets after the war. Marcus watched them disembark from their shuttle. Tall, elegant figures in flowing robes, moving with a grace that made Syl'veth's careful steps look almost clumsy. He'd never seen her among her own kind before. Now he understood why she'd seemed so small. You don't have to go, he said quietly. Syl'veth stood beside him, watching the delegation with an expression he couldn't read. It is not a matter of choice. They are here to bring us home. To reunify our people. But you have a choice. You always had a choice. She turned to look at him and something shifted in her features. A softening, a settling. I know. You taught me that. The delegation was led by a male Velcari named Vel'kari, older, and bearing the marks of high status on his ceremonial robes. He greeted Syl'veth with a bow that she returned, their rapid exchange in Velcari too fast for Marcus to follow. But he didn't need to understand the words to see the disapproval on Corveleth's face when he looked at Marcus. Or the way Syl'veth positioned herself slightly in front of him, protective. "The human claims you have bonded," Corveleth said finally, switching to standard with obvious distaste. "Is this true?" "I have claimed nothing," Marcus started, but Syl'veth interrupted. "It is true, we are Syl'veth." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the human officers present seemed to understand that something significant had been said. "Impossible," Corveleth said. "Syl'veth is sacred. It cannot form with an outsider. You have been manipulated, traumatized. You do not understand what you are saying." "I understand perfectly." Syl'veth's voice carried a strength Marcus had never heard before. "I know what was done to me. I know what I was meant to be. But I also know what I became. I chose this bond, Elder. Not because I was forced. Because I wanted it. The Council will not accept this. Then the Council will have to reject me." Marcus watched this exchange with growing alarm. "Syl'veth, what are you doing? You can go home. You should go home." She turned to him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, if Vel'kari could cry. "Home is not a place," she said. "Not anymore. My homeworld is ash. My people are scattered. Home is... Oops." She reached out and took his hand, her 4 fingers intertwining with his 5. "Home is where you are seen. Where you are fed. Where you are protected not because of what you can provide, but because of who you are." Corveleth made a sound of disgust. "You would choose a human over your own kind? A species that destroyed our world?" "I would choose this human," Syl'veth said firmly. "Who sat on the floor with me when I could not eat? Who took me outside to see the stars? Who was afraid for me when I went into danger? Who never, not once, treated me as a trophy or a prize? And if I forbid it, if I declare you exiled from the Velcari people..." Something flickered in Syl'veth's expression. Old pain, old fear. But she straightened her spine and lifted her chin. "Then I will be exiled, but I will not be alone." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself beside her. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me and whatever's left of the peace treaty." Corveleth studied them both for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened. "I wondered," he said quietly, "what it would take to make our people whole again. Perhaps it is not reclaiming the old ways, but finding new ones." He looked at Syl'veth. "You were a scholar once. You studied human philosophy." "I did. Tell me, what did you learn about human bonds? Their concept of family?" Syl'veth glanced at Marcus before answering. "Humans choose their families. Biology is not destiny. They adopt, they marry, they create bonds where none existed before. It seemed strange to me once. Now I understand it is their greatest strength." Corveleth was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a formal declaration. "The Council was wrong to distribute our people as symbols of defeat. It was a cruelty we inflicted upon ourselves in the name of peace. If Syl'veth can form with humans, then perhaps there is hope for true reconciliation." He bowed to Syl'veth, deeper than before. "You may remain, Scholar Syl'veth. And you may name this human as you're bonded in the official records." Marcus felt Syl'veth's hand tighten on his. "What does that mean?" he asked. "Being named in official records? It means," Syl'veth said softly, "that you are recognized as part of my family. That if anything happens to me, you inherit my rights, my property, my history. It means..." She looked up at him, and now he could see that her eyes were wet, a thin silver film that caught the light. "It means you are mine and I am yours. Not as ownership. As belonging." The ceremony was brief, conducted right there on the landing pad with human and Velcari witnesses. Marcus didn't understand half the words, but he understood the gesture when Syl'veth pressed her forehead to his and whispered something in her native tongue. "What did that mean?" he asked afterward, when the delegates had departed and they were alone in their quarters. "It is difficult to translate." Syl'veth sat on her bunk, the upper one, though she didn't need it anymore, though they had a real quarters now with a real bed. The closest human phrase would be, "You are worth the meal." But it means more than that. It means you are worth sharing sustenance with, worth keeping alive, worth suffering for. Marcus thought about the first meal they'd shared, sitting on the cold floor of a storage room. He thought about all of the meals since, breakfast briefings, field rations on patrol, the special dinner he'd tried to make for her birthday, even though Velcari didn't celebrate birthdays. "I didn't know," he said. "That first time. I didn't know what it meant to you." "I know." She smiled at him, and there was no uncertainty in it now. That is what made it so meaningful. "You did not perform kindness for reward. You simply were kind. Without knowing. Without expecting anything in return. I was just trying to keep you alive." "Yes." She rose from the bunk and crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "And in doing so, you gave me a reason to live. That is the gift, Marcus. Not the food itself. The willingness to share it." Marcus thought about war, about enemies, about all the Velcari he'd killed and all the friends he'd lost. He thought about how easy it would have been to hate her, how simple it would have been to treat her as what she'd been designated, a trophy, a symbol, a reminder of human victory. Instead, he'd sat on the floor and eaten cold protein paste, and somehow that had become this. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "Feelings. Relationships. I've spent my whole adult life training to fight, not to. Whatever this is." "I know. Neither am I." Syl'veth squeezed his hands. "But we have learned together this far. We can continue to learn." "Yeah." Marcus looked at her, really looked, at the scholar who had been given away as a war prize, who had starved herself rather than eat alone, who had crawled through ventilation ducts to save people she did. Known for weeks, who had defied her own people to stay with a human soldier who'd killed her kind. "Yeah, I think we can." That night, for the first time, they pushed the bunks together. Not for anything more than sleep, but for the comfort of proximity, of shared warmth, of not being alone. And when Marcus woke in the middle of the night from dreams of Proxima 4th, Syl'veth was there, her hand finding his in the dark, her voice soft in his ear. "I am here," she whispered. "Syl'veth." We faced the nightmares together. Marcus closed his eyes and for the first time in 3 years let himself believe that he might actually heal. In the morning they would eat breakfast together, as they had every morning since that first night on the floor, as they would every morning for the rest of their lives. Because home is not a place. Home is who you choose to share your meals with.